It was a slow Tuesday morning, the kind where the wind carried the smell of oil and rust through the open garage door, and the only sound was a socket wrench clinking against metal. I'd spent the last 11 years under the hood of other people's trucks, fixing what was broken, never asking too many questions. Billings wasn't the kind of place where anyone cared who you used to be. Folks showed up, worked hard, and went home to frozen dinners and late-night TV. That suited me fine. My name was Daniel Brooks. I had a job, a rented trailer by the highway, and parents who, despite their rough ways, had taken me in when nobody else would. The day they came, the sky was pale and flat like aluminum. 2 black sedans pulled up beside the gas pump's engines still running. I thought it was a customer at first, maybe a traveling salesman with a busted radiator. Then I saw the badges. One said FBI, the other Interpol, the gold edges catching the weak morning light. Daniel Brooks, the taller one, asked. His voice had the tone of someone who already knew the answer. Yeah, I said, wiping grease from my hands. What's this about? He didn't speak right away. Instead, he slid a manila folder across my workbench. Inside photocopies signatures a DNA report with my name printed in bold. The letters blurred for a second before I could even process them. Your real name, he said quietly, is Daniel Jonathan Mercer. Something in my chest snapped like a loose bolt. Mercer. The name didn't belong to a mechanic. It belonged to a headline. I'd seen it before, embossed on billboards when I was a kid, Mercer and Lowell Financial Group, Chicago. Banks, boardrooms, polished marble floors. I laughed mostly to keep breathing. You've got the wrong guy. The second agent, a woman with short auburn hair, set a photograph beside the report. A boy of 5 in a red winter coat standing in front of a mountain cabin. My face only smaller, cleaner, untouched by time. You went missing from Breckenridge, Colorado, December 1991, she said. You were 2.5. My hands were shaking now, grease smearing the photo. That can't be right, I whispered. My parents, Charles and Marla, they adopted me from a church home in Detroit. The male agent met my eyes. They forged every document. They weren't your rescuers. He paused, letting the words settle like dust. They were paid to take you. Outside, a truck passed, shaking the window glass. For a moment, the world felt hollow, like sound had been sucked out of it. 17 years of gratitude, every thank you I'd ever mumbled to the Brookses, curdled into something sour. The life I'd defended, the people I thought had saved me from the streets, were the very ones who'd sold me. I remember the agent's last words before they left low, and certain the kind that crawl under your skin and stay there. You thought they saved you, Daniel. They sold you. After the agents left, the silence in that garage pressed down like a heavy lid. I sat there for hours, staring at the folder they'd left on my workbench, the name Daniel Mercer staring back at me in black ink. Every sound, the ticking wall clock, the hum of the old fridge in the corner, felt too loud. I kept waiting to wake up. But memories don't wake up with you. They start crawling back. It began with smells, the damp wood of the old Brooks house in the mountains outside Livingston, the metallic scent of padlocks, and the sharp tang of bleach. That house had too many locks for a home. The front door, the pantry, even the basement door, everything closed with a click that said, "Don't ask." Charles used to say it was to keep bears out. But I knew better. I was the thing they were keeping in. I was 10 when I realized other kids went to school. I watched the yellow bus pass the house every morning through that tiny window in my room, the one that faced the pines. I'd wave once quietly, even though no one could see me. You're special, Marla told me once when I asked why I couldn't go. The world wouldn't understand you. She said it like a kindness. but her smile never reached her eyes. When I messed up, spilled milk, asked too many questions, stayed outside too long, Charles led me to the storm cellar. Cold dirt floor, no light except what came through the crack of the door. "Think about how lucky you are, boy," he'd say, locking it behind me. I used to count my breaths to stay calm. After a few hours, you stop feeling afraid of the dark. You just become part of it. They made me call them sir and ma'am, never mom or dad. Caleb, their real son, called them whatever he wanted. He had everything: a red Chevy, a girlfriend from town, weekends on the lake. When he laughed at dinner, they laughed with him. When I spoke, forks stopped moving. Once I asked Charles if I had any family somewhere. I don't know why I picked that night. Maybe the silence was too heavy. His hand hit the table so hard the salt shaker tipped. "We saved you from a crackhead in Detroit," he growled. "Don't ever ask again." I stopped asking. But questions have a way of growing in silence. The only person who ever looked me in the eye was Mrs. Linda Parsons, the widow who lived 2 houses down in a yellow cottage that smelled like apples and cinnamon. She'd wave from her porch, sometimes bring over pie when Marla wasn't home. Once she caught me waiting outside in the rain because Charles had locked the door again. She handed me a towel and whispered, "That isn't normal, honey." Her voice was soft, the kind that could make you believe in warmth again. Years later, when I thought about her, I realized she was the first person who treated me like I wasn't invisible. The Brooks house was full of locks, but Mrs. Parsons, she was the first door that ever opened. Mrs. Parsons passed away the spring I turned 30. The air still smelled like thawing earth and pine smoke when they carried her casket down the small church steps. I stood in the back, hands stuffed in my jacket pockets, trying not to be seen. She had no children, no one to clear out the little yellow house that had always felt safer than mine. A week later, the pastor asked if I could help sort through her things. I said yes before I knew why. Maybe I just wanted one more excuse to step inside a place that had never raised its voice at me. The house was quiet, everything wrapped in the faint sweetness of cinnamon and old wood polish. On her writing desk, under stacks of letters tied with ribbon, I found an envelope stamped Adoption Services Chicago, 1991. My chest tightened. I turned it over, saw her handwriting on the front for Daniel when he's ready. Inside it were copies of papers I'd never seen. My adoption forms, the same seal that had hung framed on our living room wall for years. Only this one looked wrong. The ink too dark, the signature identical on every page. At the bottom, a notary mark, but no state number, no embossed seal. I'd worked at garages long enough to spot when something was manufactured. That document was as fake as a rebuilt engine with no serial code. I didn't know who to call. The Brookses were gone for the week visiting Caleb at college, and I couldn't exactly bring forged papers to the sheriff without an explanation. I remembered the name from the funeral guest book, Frank Danner, retired county police. He'd written, "Call me if you ever need help." Frank answered on the first ring. "Son," he said after I told him what I found, "that paper smells wrong. I've seen forged seals before. Bring it over." His house was lined with war medals and framed certificates that hadn't been dusted in years. He studied the document under a desk lamp, running a thumb over the ink. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing," he murmured. "You should get your DNA tested." Quietly. "There's a kit I can get you from Helena." 2 weeks later, the results arrived by email. I opened it in the garage after hours engine noise still humming in my ears. 99.9% match, Jonathan Mercer, Chicago IL. The same Mercer whose company name gleamed on every highway billboard in the Midwest. My hands went cold around the phone. I thought of the locked doors, the basement, Charles saying we saved you. Saved me from what I drove home that night, headlights cutting through the mountain fog. The house was dark, too dark. No porch light, no truck, no sound of Marla's TV. I pushed the door open and smelled smoke. The living room was scorched, the couch half burned, the safe behind the painting wide open and empty. They were gone. Every drawer pulled, every trace erased. And for the first time in my life, I realized the people who raised me weren't running from the past. They were running from me. The fire marshals said the damage looked accidental, maybe from a space heater. I knew better. That smell, half wood smoke, half gasoline, wasn't an accident. The Brookses had left the place like a shed snakeskin, and I was the ghost they'd been hiding from. Within 24 hours, the sheriff's office had cordoned off the property. By the next week, 2 men in dark suits showed up at the garage again. Different badges, this time FBI missing persons. They called me Mr. Mercer now. Hearing that name out loud still felt wrong, like trying on clothes that didn't fit. The taller Agent Hull laid out the timeline on a folder, like a crime map. Colorado, December 1991. Breckenridge Ski Resort. 2-year-old heir to the Mercer and Lowell banking family disappears during an avalanche evacuation. Search teams spent weeks combing the mountain, assuming the boy had been buried alive. The mother died of heart failure 6 months later. The father, Jonathan Mercer, never stopped looking. I sat in silence, the sound of snowplows from the street outside scraping through my head. "Who took me?" I finally asked. The second agent, Reeves, looked at Hull before answering. "Your uncle, William Mercer, your father's younger brother." For a second I thought I'd misheard. Uncle. The word hung in the air, too domestic for the violence it carried. Why, Hull exhaled. Control. The inheritance clause in your grandfather's will stated that if you died before age 35, your shares 31% of the company would transfer to the next male heir. William. The folder snapped shut. "He hired Charles and Marla Brooks to make you disappear," Reeves said quietly. "He gave them money, fake papers, and a new life. They were paid from your own trust account. He's been draining it for years." My stomach turned cold. I remembered that night when I was 10, the first and only time a stranger had come to visit. Charles had told me to stay in my room, but curiosity got the better of me. I'd peeked through the stairwell and seen a man in a gray suit sitting at the kitchen table, his hands folded like he was praying. He'd looked up once, met my eyes, and smiled. Charles called him Mr. Whitman, said he was a distant relative. I'd believed it. Now I could see the resemblance, the same sharp nose, the same eyes as the man in the photo from the FBI file. William Mercer. My uncle. The man who watched me grow up in chains and called it charity. I remembered, too, the times Marla whispered into the kitchen phone, voice low. "WM says not yet. He'll come when the time's right." I'd thought WM stood for Women's Ministry, the church group she claimed to help. Reeves looked at me like he'd already walked this road with too many others. "You weren't raised," he said. "You were managed." That sentence gutted me more than anything. I wasn't just stolen, I was maintained like property. Every rule, every beating, every locked door had a purpose. Keep the heir broken, hidden and quiet, until it was time to erase him for good. And as the agents packed up their files, the truth settled in my bones. Like winter frost, my own blood had signed the order for my disappearance. The night after the agents left, I drove back to what was left of the Brooks house. The fire crews were long gone. Only the smell remained, wet ash and gasoline seeping into the ground. The house looked hollow, stripped of everything human. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe proof that the life I'd lived hadn't been entirely false. Or maybe I just needed to see the place one more time before the wrecking crews erased it for good. The basement door had melted into its hinges, but the padlock was still there, charred black. I pried it open with a crowbar, the metal giving way with a soft cry. The air inside was cold, heavy with mold and soot. I turned my flashlight on the concrete floor, and that's when I saw it, the faint outline of a square cleaner than the rest. I dropped to my knees and started scraping at it. The tile lifted easily, revealing a shallow cavity. Inside sat a second safe, smaller than the one upstairs, untouched by the flames. It took me an hour to break it open. When the lock finally clicked, the smell of burned paper hit me first. Inside were plastic folders, half-melted photographs, and a USB drive wrapped in electrical tape. I laid everything on the dusty workbench under the single bulb still hanging from the ceiling. The USB held dozens of emails threads between Marla Brooks and WM. The project completes on his 35th birthday. Continue behavioral suppression. Avoid outside interference. After termination, assets revert as planned. Each message ended with the same signature WM. I didn't need the FBI to tell me what those initials meant. Beneath the folders were printed forms, psychological evaluations dated years in the past, signed with my name. Diagnoses of severe depressive episodes, suicidal ideation, all written in handwriting that mimicked mine. It hit me they'd been preparing a script, building a story for the world to believe when I killed myself. There were photographs, 2 faded color prints. A boy with blonde hair standing beside a woman in a garden. She was holding a violin, her smile gentle, proud. My mother, I realized. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was the same face from my dreams, the voice I'd heard humming lullabies I never remembered learning. I took the folders to Frank Danner. He met me at the diner on Main Street, the kind of place that hadn't changed since the 70s. He flipped through the papers, his jaw tightening. "This isn't just kidnapping, son," he said quietly. "This is a full-blown operation." 2 nights later, Frank's pickup was found in a ditch off Route 89. The driver's side door had been crushed inward. They called it a hit and run. I called it a warning. That same night, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, low and calm. "Daniel, my name is Lydia Grant. I work for your father. We need to meet. Tonight." Before I could answer, she added, "They know you found the files. You're not safe there." Then the line went dead. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about stolen money or forged papers. It was survival mine, and maybe his. I met Lydia in a motel off the interstate, the kind of place where the wallpaper peeled like old paint and the soda machine swallowed your quarters. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, sharp eyes, the kind of calm that comes from walking through storms. She laid a file on the table between us, her nails tapping once before she spoke. "Your father's in Chicago," she said. "He's alive. He never stopped searching for you." The words sat in the air, heavy and impossible. Father. Not a name I'd ever used before. 2 days later, we flew out before sunrise. I hadn't been on a plane since I was a kid, and the clouds looked unreal from above, soft, endless, unreachable. Lydia barely spoke, just scrolled through her phone, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen. "Somewhere over Iowa," she said quietly. "William's on the run. We've frozen some accounts, but he's trying to move $8 million in bearer bonds. He won't get far." By the time we landed, the sky over Chicago was steel gray, the city humming beneath it. We drove straight to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The security guard at the private wing nodded to Lydia like he'd seen her 100 times. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like I'd swallowed a piston. Jonathan Mercer looked smaller than I imagined. The photos in the FBI files showed a man with boardroom shoulders and a press-ready smile. The man in front of me was thin, his hair silver hospital gown loose around his collarbones, but his eyes gray with a touch of blue were mine. He stared at me for a long time before speaking. "Daniel," he whispered, voice cracking on the name. "Every birthday I lit a candle for you. I never blew it out. For a moment, all I could do was stand there, afraid that if I moved, the room would collapse." Then he reached for my hand, his fingers trembling, and I sat down beside the bed. There were no cinematic tears, no swelling music, just the quiet sound of two people breathing in the same rhythm for the first time in 30 years. Lydia slipped out of the room to give us privacy. Jonathan told me about the night I vanished, how my mother had played her violin for me before bed, how the storm had rolled in faster than the ski patrol could react, how the avalanche covered every sound. "They told me you were gone," he said, eyes wet. "But a father knows. I could still feel you out there." That evening the news broke. William Mercer arrested at Denver International Airport, caught at customs with 2 fake passports and a briefcase of stolen bonds. Watching his face on the TV felt like exhaling a ghost. The next morning, Lydia drove me to the old Mercer estate on Lake Michigan. My grandmother, Helen Lowell, was waiting on the porch, her white hair tied back, her eyes bright with disbelief. "You have her smile," she said, pressing my hand to her chest. Inside, she showed me a room frozen in time, a child's bed, toy trains, books in German and English. On the dresser lay a small violin, polished but unplayed. When I picked it up, the weight felt familiar. I drew the bow across the strings, and the melody came unbidden, the same tune that had haunted my dreams for years. My mother's lullaby. The sound filled the house, soft and broken like something lost, finally finding its way home. The day of the trial, Chicago was wrapped in sleet. The courthouse stood gray against the skyline, its marble steps slick with ice and reporters. I'd never seen so many cameras in my life. Lydia stayed close beside me, her hand steady on my shoulder, guiding me through the crowd. Inside, everything smelled like paper old wood and anticipation. United States v. William Mercer et al. Was printed across every document I signed that morning. Seeing my own name there, Daniel Jonathan Mercer, victim, witness, still felt unreal. When they brought them in, the world seemed to slow. Marla walked first, small and pale, her wrists swallowed by handcuffs. Charles followed heavier, now his eyes fixed on the floor. Caleb came last, trying to look older than 26, but his hands shook when he sat down. And then William, perfectly pressed suit, silver hair, a face that still knew how to smile at cameras. The uncle who'd watched me grow up in a prison of his own design. The prosecutor started with the timeline, the kidnapping, the forged records, the decades of stolen trust fund money. I listened to it all like someone hearing their own obituary. When Marla took the stand, she looked everywhere but at me. Her voice trembled as she said she'd been promised a better life. She told the jury how William had paid them to fake an adoption, how he sent yearly payments through offshore accounts. Then came her confession, the one that made the room fall silent. He told us the boy wouldn't live past 35, said it was safer that way. We were supposed to make it look like an accident. Her voice cracked on the last word. William only laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that echoed off the walls. "Money was my god," he said when his turn came. He was just collateral. Something in me wanted to stand up and shout, but I stayed still. Jonathan did not. My father rose from the bench, his voice steady but shaking with fury. "You destroyed my son's life," he said, his cane trembling in his hand. "But you can't touch his soul." The judge's gavel came down hard, but the moment was already carved into every camera lens in that room. When Marla turned to me later, tears streaking her face, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Daniel. We thought you'd never remember." I looked at her and saw every locked door, every bruise, every night she turned the key. "Forgiveness isn't yours to ask for," I said quietly. "You had your chance." The verdicts came down just before sunset. William Mercer, life imprisonment without parole. Charles and Marla Brooks, 30 years each for kidnapping and fraud. Caleb Brooks, 15 years as an accessory after the fact. As the guards led them away, the light from the tall courtroom windows spilled across the floor like a benediction. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight shift, not gone, but lighter. Justice doesn't heal everything, but it does let you breathe again. A year passed before I could stand to hear my own name spoken without flinching. When the court papers finally arrived, the black letters on the white page looked clean, almost gentle. Daniel Jonathan Mercer. Name change. Granted. The clerk handed me the envelope with a small smile, but I just nodded, folding it into my jacket pocket, like something fragile. For the first time, the name felt like it belonged to me, not to bloodlines or bank accounts, but to the man who survived them. After the trial, Chicago turned into a city of ghosts. My father's health faded through the winter, the weight of years pressing down harder than any sentence the court could give. When he died that spring, the lake outside his window was still frozen thin sheets of light moving across the ice. Lydia called me from the hospital. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the catch at the end. He left a letter handwritten neat, folded twice. "Blood built our empire," he wrote, "but love will rebuild it. Use what you have to give others the life we almost lost." That sentence stayed with me. By summer, I'd left Chicago for Colorado, back to the kind of mountains that had once stolen my childhood, but now felt like a promise. I bought a rundown auto shop on the edge of Fort Collins, a place that smelled of oil pine and morning dust. The locals came in slow at first, then steady. No one there cared about last names. To them, I was just Dan, the guy who could make an engine purr again. With part of my inheritance, I started a small scholarship fund, the Linda Parsons Foundation for kids aging out of foster care. I wanted them to have something more than survival. Every check I signed felt like a quiet rebellion against everything the Brookses and William had built. Healing wasn't cinematic. It came in pieces: Sunday coffee after church, long talks with the pastor who never asked for details, sessions with a therapist who taught me that forgiveness isn't surrender. It's release. Some nights I still woke to the sound of doors locking in my head, but morning always came softer. One evening I drove into the foothills, the violin my grandmother had given me resting in the passenger seat. The sun was low, the sky turning copper over the snow line. I sat on a boulder, tuned the strings, and let the first notes spill into the cold air. The melody was simple, the same lullaby my mother once played before everything went dark. The sound rose thin and pure, echoing across the valley, until it felt like the mountains were answering back. I closed my eyes and breathed. For the first time, there was no fear, no guilt, no shadow of someone else's control, only the quiet truth of being alive. They stole my name, my childhood, my peace, but they never stole my soul. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share how it made you feel in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from every corner of the world. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe to Domestic Tragedy for more true emotional tales of family justice and redemption.